Alrighty. Awesome. No doubles. Love to see it. Alright. Right scene. Right tab. Alrighty.
That was an unstoppable, unkillable in the Vietnam War that went into battle with nothing.
Go back to start.
John Rambo, the action hero that was an unstoppable, unkillable Green Beret from the Vietnam War that went into battle with nothing more than a big knife. This video is not about him. It's also not about the man that inspired that character. That was Audie Murphy. This video is about the real Rambo, the actual man that was inspired to join the military because of Audie Murphy, that would go on to become a Green Beret and go into combat against 1,000 men with nothing more than a big knife. Today we're talking about call sign Tango Mike, aka...
It's okay, Samuel. I'm not usually live on this side as often.
Benavidez. This video is brought to you by Delete Me!
I thought you'd never ask.
2 this week, huh?
Which one was I supposed to use?
I mean, either was fine, but both works, I guess.
Still on the couch?
Yeah, of course. Love you.
That's great.
Life. Anyways, Delete Me. Super simple, straightforward business. You give them money, they make sure that your personal information is not being sold on the internet by data brokers. Okay, and here's the thing with this. When I first started, I didn't want to give Delete Me my personal information because the whole purpose is I wanted my personal information off the internet, and giving my personal information to a company on the internet just kind of seemed counterproductive. But with Delete Me, you don't really have to give them that much information. When you sign up, you can give them as little information as you want. All they need is like your name and an email address, and that's it. And they will go through the internet and find everything for sale that's associated with that name and that email. They're going to come to you and be like, have you ever been associated with this address, or are you related to this person, or is this your old email, or is this your phone number? And anytime you tell them, yes, that's me, they're going to go ahead and get all that information taken down so it's no longer for sale. Honestly, it's alarming how much of your personal information is on the internet and people are apparently making money selling it. Nothing makes you want Delete Me more than having Delete Me and seeing all the shit they find. And once that initial wave of information is taken down, they're going to keep monitoring all of these data brokers, and anytime there is a new listing available with any of your information, they're going to make sure it gets taken down as soon as possible. So if you want to check them out, I'll have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video. Born on August 5th, 1935, Roy's first memory in life was attending his own father's funeral after he had passed away from tuberculosis when Roy was 3 years old.
Oh, that's rough.
Roy's mother would remarry, and 9 months after that, she would give birth to Roy's new half-sister. And from that moment on, Roy was essentially on his own. His parents gave all of their attention to their new daughter, and Roy and his younger brother Rogelio were kind of neglected. 2 years later, Roy's mother would develop a cough that would get progressively worse and worse, similar to how Roy's father had. Roy's mother now had tuberculosis too, and while she was on her deathbed, her husband, Roy's stepfather, would inform her that he would absolutely not be raising another man's kids. And 6-year-old Roy overhears this. He's terrified. He has no idea what's going to happen to him and his younger brother Rogelio. He's already lost his dad, he's about to lose his mom, and his stepdad doesn't want him, and that's the only family he's ever known in his entire life. On the day of his mother's funeral, his stepfather tells him and Rogelio to pack their things. They're going to go live somewhere else. They load up in the car, go off to where the funeral's held, and at the funeral, a man comes up and introduces himself as Nicholas Benavidez. He is their father's brother, Roy and Rogelio's uncle, and they're gonna come live with him. After the funeral, they load up in Uncle Nicholas's car and they head off to El Campo, Texas, Roy and Rogelio's new home. Upon their arrival, they get to meet what is going to be their new immediate family. They have their Uncle Nicholas, their Aunt Alexandria, their grandfather Salvador, and their 8 cousins. Roy is then informed that it is now
big family.
7 boys sharing 4 beds, and that everyone in this family has to work to make this entire thing work because they don't have a lot of money. All the kids in the family are expected to go to school, get good grades, and then after school, they all have a job that they are expected to go out and do to help contribute to the family. And at the age of 7, Roy's first job was to go shine shoes to earn a little bit of extra money. Then in the summers or any other time the opportunity presented itself, they would all go out as a family and work in the fields picking crops. And this goes on for Roy's entire childhood, and his new family is incredible. His aunt, his uncle, his grandfather Salvador, they're the best people on the planet, but they're also being spread across their work and the 9 other kids in the house, so no kid gets a whole lot of attention. So between that, losing both of his parents, and being abandoned by his stepfather, he's kind of an angry kid, understandably so. So at a young age, he developed a pretty bad attitude, and he was not afraid to fight about it. One of his favorite things to do when he was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old was to go to the movie theater and watch the newsreels of all the different things that were happening in World War II. And he was inspired by the paratroopers. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be in the United States Army. But the problem with this pastime of going to the movie theater to watch all the newsreels was that you had to pay to get inside, and Roy didn't have any money. All his shoe shining money went back to the family. So Roy and a bunch of other kids would wait outside the movie theater for one of the previous showings to leave, and hopefully rich people would throw their pocket change out and let all the poor kids scramble and fight over it. It didn't take young Roy long to figure out that if he just beat up all the other kids, he would get all the money, and then he wouldn't have to run and dive for pocket change.
I mean, it's not the nicest solution, but you know, it works. Gotta do what you gotta do sometimes when you don't have a lot of money.
The enemy cannot push a button if you disable his hand.
And that's just the beginning of the fighting. It gets so much worse because as World War II progresses and all the young men go off to fight this war, there's a huge lack of manpower all across the United States. And to help alleviate that, one of the things the United States government does is basically opens up the southern border so that people can freely come into the United States and begin working. Because of that, there ends up being this huge misconception, especially in any state bordering Mexico, that any person of Hispanic descent wasn't even American, they were just some Mexican that was showing up to work in the fields.
Y el acento, ¿dónde are you from?
Scranton. Y before that, La Philadelphia.
This leads to young Roy getting picked on at school. All the kids are calling him
His
a dumb
actor's
Mexican.
great.
They're calling him he's not American. They're calling him a pepper belly. And he's like 8, 9 years old. He has no idea what's going on. So he goes to his grandfather, Salvador. And Grandpa explains to him, Roy, the Benavidez family fought against Mexico to gain their independence, just like any white person's ancestors fought against Great Britain to get their independence. Your mother was Yaqui Native American. You are just as much, if not more American than anybody else. The Benavidez family name is Mexican, but we are Americans. You have multiple cousins fighting for America in the war right now. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you're not American, which is a great sentiment. I love it. However, what young, angry Roy honed in on was they fought for it. From this point forward, anybody that wants to make fun of Roy has a fight on their hands, and they almost never won because Roy, at the age of 9, 10 years old, has been working in fields and shining shoes after school every day for years. He is way above the average level of toughness for a young man. And Roy wasn't even that big of a kid. If anything, he was smaller than average, but none of the bullies were bigger than him either once they were looking up at him from the flat of their back, which is always where they happen to find themselves eventually. Now, it's also important to mention that Roy, while he does have a temper and he's not afraid to fight about it, he does have standards. He was being raised right by his aunt and his uncle and his grandfather. Roy would not hit a girl if a girl made fun of him.
He's a good kid.
Hope you're doing well.
But what he would do is when they went out to recess, he would kick dirt at her until her brother or her boyfriend came to stop him, and then he'd beat the shit out of that guy.
Hello.
Fair.
And this goes on Roy's entire child. He's always getting in fights. He struggles in the classroom academically, but outside of school, he does work super hard to help provide for his family. He still loves going to the movie theater, watching all the newsreels about World War II. He still wants to grow up to be a paratrooper, and he also loves hanging out with his uncle and his grandfather, Salvador. And his grandpa had all these amazing stories that he would share with him, and all these stories had some underlying meaning or some lesson that Roy needed to be taught. And his favorite story was when his grandpa was younger and he was a cowboy, and he was on this trail, and another cowboy had fallen off his horse down onto a cliff face and he was stuck. And Grandpa Salvador stopped, took his belt off, and lowered it down to help pull this cowboy up and saved his life. And the moral of that story was, when somebody needs help, you help them. And all this keeps going on until he's about 14 years old and he drops out of school. He's not going to go to high school. He's just going to go get a full-time job and help support his family. So that's what he does. He goes out and he starts working at this local tire shop.
Sounds like my dad
Uncle
did when he was
Nicholas,
younger.
realizing that Roy is going to be a man soon and that getting in fights like he does is going to have real-world repercussions, figures that he needs to help Roy get over that somehow. So he encourages Roy to start amateur boxing, and Roy is incredible at it. He makes it all the way to the state tournament his first year of doing it. While there, he ends up losing his very first match, and in the locker room after his fight, the young man that had just beat him comes up and wants to shake his hand now that they have their gloves off, and Roy's anger and temper gets the better of him, and
He's gonna deck him in the face. He's gonna deck him in the face, isn't he?
ends up fighting this kid in the locker room, wrestling him into a stall and shoving his head into a toilet. After Roy does that, all the other coaches, all the other fighters, Roy's coach, all look at him like, what the fuck, dude? And they're all disappointed. And it was the first time in Roy's
Not
life
sure.
that he felt ashamed and disappointed in himself. And this is where Roy really starts to get a lid and a grasp on how to control his anger. After that, Roy
Probably
gives
some
up amateur boxing.
firearms
He continues working
missions,
full-time
probably,
in the tire
at
shop, and
least.
that's when his
Maybe
boss,
some
Mr.
official
Hack, the tire
documents.
shop owner, also kind of becomes his father figure too, because he works with him and he's around him so much. He just becomes that older male role model that Roy has always kind of been looking for. And he continues to help Roy mature and get a better grip on his anger and more control of himself. And this goes on for a couple of years. And then one day when Roy is 17 years old, a recruiter from the Texas National Guard comes in and wants to hang up a flyer at the tire shop for anybody who's interested in joining the Texas National Guard. And on that flyer was none other than Roy's role model, Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier of World War II. You see, this is right in the middle of the Korean War, so Audie Murphy, the World War II war hero, had joined the Texas National Guard to help with recruiting, and he was also going to train the next generation of soldiers. And at this point, Audie Murphy's the shit. He's got an award-winning book, he's an actor, and when he's acting, he's playing the role of himself in movies, and he's being told by directors, hey, I know you were there and you're literally just
Oh my
portraying
God.
the shit you did, but you need to tamp it down a little bit because it's so unrealistic, nobody's going to believe this story. This is
Why not keep the authenticity? Like, I know that there was, like, a lot of crazy stuff that happened, but, like, you can still keep some of the authenticity from it. Because I understand there's, like, certain things they don't want to show on media and all that, and I totally get that, but we don't need it. Not everything needs to be, like, toned down. It's honestly one thing that drives me nuts is when media gets toned down.
is a Texan that was rejected by the Marine Corps for being too small and then went on to be the most decorated soldier of World War II, earning the Medal of Honor for going toe-to-toe with an entire German SS battalion by himself from the back of a flaming M10 tank destroyer with a 50 caliber machine gun. So Roy Benavidez figures if the Texas National Guard is good enough for Audie Murphy, then that's exactly where he wants to be. So he joins the Texas National Guard, he ships off, goes to basic training, ends up coming back, he's doing his weekends, he's doing his training in the summer. That goes on for a couple of years while he's still working at the tire shop with Mr. Haddock. Then one day he decides that he likes doing Army stuff a lot more than he likes changing tires, so he wants to go full-time Army. He goes over to the active duty recruiter's office. It's a shared office. They've got the Navy, the Marines, the Army, and the Air Force all right there in one building.
Makes
Roy
sense.
walks right past the Navy, walks right past the Marines, walks right past the Air Force, goes straight to the active duty Army recruiter, says, here's my guard papers, I'm a corporal, I want to be a paratrooper. I don't just want a normal contract, I want a contract that guarantees me airborne school. At this point, the Army recruiter looks at Roy, who's like 130 pounds soaking wet, and he's like, man, you're not big enough to be a paratrooper. At which point, I'm paraphrasing here, but Roy says something along the lines of, well, I could cut you down to my size and we'll see if you're good enough to be a paratrooper. Maybe that'll help you make a decision. At which point, the Marine recruiter overhears that and he comes walking over and he's like, son, you should be a Marine. You've got the right attitude. I don't care how big you are. You should come be a devil dog with me. At which point, Roy's like, no, I don't want to be a Marine. I want to be in the Army just like Audie Murphy was, which brings everything full circle because Audie Murphy was rejected from the Marines for being too small. And now Roy Benavidez is rejecting the Marines because he wants to be like Audie Murphy. Then the other Army recruiter, who's a captain, an officer, somebody that outranks the sergeant that thinks Roy's too small, comes in and he's like, no, we'll take him. Come with me. So they go, they start doing the paperwork, and Roy's like, okay, I'm a corporal in the National Guard. I've already been through basic training. I've already done through job training. You should just be able to send me straight to airborne school and then give me a duty station. And the recruiter's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Roy signs on the dotted line. He packs his shit. He gets on the bus and he's off to the Army. And Roy then immediately finds out the hard way that recruiter was either not listening to him at all or he was lying to him because they sent Roy straight to basic training again. And to add insult to injury, he is also not awarded an airborne slot after that, so he's not going to be a paratrooper like he always wanted to. After he gets done with training, he immediately gets sent over to Korea, where he is going to be there right after the Korean War ended, and he's going to be manning the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, between what is now North and South Korea. He's in Korea for a year, then he comes back home for a little bit stateside, then they ship him out to Germany, and while he's there, he learns how to speak German, and in Roy's own words, he becomes the first Hispanic American that could speak German with a Southern accent.
Si, corretto.
He gets done in Germany, he comes
Oh,
back
my.
home, he goes to military police school, becomes an MP, and he gets assigned to basically being a glorified chauffeur for high-ranking military officers, generals, colonels, etc. And then randomly, one day, a couple months out from his contract being up with the army, he's trying to decide whether or not he wants to re-enlist, and this General Westmoreland, asks him, "You ever thought about being a paratrooper?" And Roy's like, "Yeah, actually, that's only reason I'm here. I wanted to do that. I kind of got screwed out of it. I'm thinking about re-enlisting, and if I re-enlist, I really want to be able to become a paratrooper." To which the general kind of like doesn't even really continue the conversation. He's just like, "Huh, well, that's neat." Anyways, we're at the airport now. I gotta go, bye. And then Roy never sees this guy ever again. A couple months later, Roy's contract is about to be up. He has to decide if he's gonna re-enlist or if he's gonna get out. And his potential re-enlistment contract, there's an airborne packet courtesy of General Westmoreland. If he decides to re-enlist, he will get to go to airborne school and he will get to become a paratrooper. So that's what he does. He goes to airborne school, gets his jump wings,
Yeah,
becomes
quite
a
the trip.
full-fledged paratrooper, and then he gets stationed with the legendary 82nd Airborne Division out of Fort Liberty, sorry. Okay, sidebar. Look, I don't care if we're going to be renaming stuff every once in a while. That's completely fine. However, name it after a war hero or something. Don't just pick a generic term like Liberty, okay? I don't need Fort Liberty. I don't need Fort Life. I don't need Fort Pursuit of Happiness, okay? Quit doing generic shit and name it after an actual badass war hero. Anyways, Roy's at Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty, North Carolina. He is with the 82nd Airborne. During this time, he's training, he's working, he's doing his thing. He also ends up meeting his wife, and he goes about this the old school way. He has to have chaperone meetings with her until he earns enough street cred to finally be able to sit on the front porch of her parents' house with her. Her name is Lala. They get married, she ends up getting pregnant, things are going exactly how they're supposed to go. And then in 1965, Roy gets deployed to Vietnam at the age of 30. Roy gets sent over there as an advisor. He's going to be training the South Vietnamese in how to fight back against the North Vietnamese and hopefully prevent the spread of communism. That's the plan. So he starts training these guys, he's working with them, and it gets to the point that he has to end up going out on some of these missions with them because they need a leader. They need somebody with more experience to go out and show them how it's done. And he does that multiple times. And then one day he's walking through the jungle and all of a sudden, Roy has no idea what's going on. One second, he's in South Vietnam on a mission. The next second, he's in a hospital in the Philippines, and everything goes by in a blur. And before he knows it, he's in San Antonio at the Fort Sam Houston Medical Center. At this point, Roy still has no idea what's going on. Doctors and nurses are coming and going. There's some pregnant woman named Lala that's trying to hang out with him all day long, and he's just not comprehending anything that's happening to him. Roy's wife, Lala, would be informed that Roy had stepped on a landmine in South Vietnam.
Thank you so much for that
during war
follow,
patrols.
Country
And
Monday.
they don't know how he survived, but the going theory was that it was some type of defect with the landmine, that when it exploded, the entire landmine didn't fragment, but the top of it stayed intact as one solid metal plate. And when he stepped on it, it detonated it, and the landmine plate shot up and smacked him on the ass so hard that it broke his back and jolted his brain so severely that they don't think he'll ever regain his memory. In addition to that, due to his broken back, he would almost certainly never be able to walk again, even if he did come to mentally. And this goes on for weeks of Lala showing him pictures, telling him stories, trying to remind him of who he was. And then one day, he just wakes up. He snaps out of it. He's sitting in a rehab room at the hospital by himself at a table, and in front of him, there's like the child's toy, you know, the big rectangle with like the cylinders and the squares and the triangles, and you shove each one through the corresponding shape. He's sitting there with that in front of him, and the PT person is like, "Can you put the shapes through there, Roy?" And he's like, "Yeah, obviously I can put the shapes through there." They're like, "Well, why don't you go ahead and do it?" He's like, "What, am I applying to get into the Marine Corps? Like, what is happening right now? Why do you think I can't do that?" And they're like, "Well, just go ahead and do it." So he does it. He's like, "Okay. Obviously, what is happening right now?" They then explain to him that he has been unable to do that for weeks every single time they've got him to try, and Roy is just like literally snapped out of it like that. He's 100% mentally all there. He just doesn't remember the accident itself. He remembers everything else. So Roy's back. This is great. Now he just wants to get back up on his feet. He wants to keep serving in the army. He wants to keep jumping out of planes. He wants to go back to Vietnam and be with his guys. And that's just how Roy is. So he demands that they start giving him physical therapy as soon as possible. And that's what he does. And over the course of a couple weeks, he comes to the painful realization that these physical therapists aren't getting him ready to walk and run and be in the army again. They're getting him mentally ready to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. The doctors are telling him he's never going to walk again. He's going to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, and he needs to accept that. But Roy's not buying.
I'm calling it now. Just from everything I've heard so far from this, he's going to make the recovery, and he's going to learn how to walk, and he's going to make it everybody else's problem. I'm calling it now.
it. If they're not going to push him to get the results that he wants, he's going to push himself. The night nurses come in, they catch him, they give him a pill, they knock him out, they put him to sleep. He wakes up the next morning, his hip hurts from where he fell out of bed, and his leg muscles are sore from bearing weight for the first time in months. But the plus side, his hip hurts and his legs are sore, so obviously they're going to work if he just keeps building them up stronger and stronger. So that's what he does every night. He rolls out of bed, he drags himself across the floor, lifts himself up, and puts as much weight on his legs as he possibly can. Sometimes the nurses catch him and try to put him back to sleep. The nurses are getting pissed off at him because he keeps doing this, but his legs keep getting stronger and stronger, and he's able to make it over to the nightstand faster and faster. And it gets to the point where all the other guys in this medical bay realize what he's doing, and they start cheering him on at night. Nobody's ratting him out. They're trying to distract the nurses to get Roy the time that he needs to be able to do his version of physical therapy. And this goes on for months. During the day, they're getting him ready for his life in a wheelchair. He's begging them just more time for more PT and he'll be able to walk again. They're not buying it. They're doing the paperwork in the background to get him med boarded out of the US Army. They know that he's done. But Roy never gives up on himself, and he keeps training every single night. Then, after having been in the hospital for 5 months, the doctor walks in with Roy's discharge papers. Roy begs and he pleads not to discharge him out of the Army, and the doctor finally says, Roy, even if we continue doing PT, at best, maybe you'll be able to stand up one day. You're never going to be able to walk again. At that point, Roy hops up out of the bed, stands directly in front of the doctor, and takes one step towards him. And it was one of the most excruciating pains that he's ever felt in his entire life. He's got tears in his eyes, but he's looking this doctor right in his face. And the doctor, shocked that Roy hopped out of bed and took a step towards him, says, Benavidez, if you can walk out of this room, I'll tear these papers up. So Roy walked out of that room.
Oh, bang! Hold on now, hold on. Oh, that hurt. Walk it off. Hey, man, you can walk.
Shortly after that, he walked out of that hospital and went back to Fort Bragg. Obviously, he gets assigned a desk job, but despite that, Roy's going to do the best job he can no matter what tasks they give him. So he crushes that job the best he can, and when he goes home at night, he continues to train. First, he starts walking a couple miles a day. Then he's walking 5 miles a day. Then he's running
I got built
5
back
miles
up.
a day. Then he's running 10 miles a day and doing 500 push-ups in a single day, every day. And he works himself up to being just as fast, just as strong as he ever was. And then, since he did such a good job at that desk job, he kind of figured out how things worked. And then wouldn't you know it, one day, out of the blue, Roy Benavidez's name ended up on a manifest to do one of the jumps for the 82nd Airborne
Oh
Straight.
yeah,
Not
definitely.
just one manifest, but
Base stock for that.
3. Roy did 3
Mega based.
jumps in a single day after having broken his back.
What are the odds of that?
What are the odds of that?
And after having done that, Roy sits back, relaxes, reflects on his achievement. No, I'm just kidding. He goes out and decides that he wants to become a Green Beret now. So he goes off to Special Forces selection and he makes it. He passes. He becomes a Green Beret. On one hand, absolutely incredible. It is almost unbelievable that he's able to accomplish this. On the other hand, it's obvious that he was going to be able to accomplish this, right? Because if you don't know about these Special Forces groups, it's never like the fastest, the strongest, the freak athlete that ends up making these Special Forces.
College
units.
becomes
It's always
everybody's
just that
problem.
tough farm kid that you're going to have to kill to get him to stop. It's that person that's never going to quit. And if there was ever a embodiment of that archetype of person, it's Roy Benavidez, okay? Homie stepped on a landmine and literally walked it off. Of course he had what it took to become a Green Beret. That's just to get selected to be in the unit though, so then he has to go off and get all of his other training. He becomes a linguist, he gets cross-trained as a medic, he gets trained on every heavy weapon system, he becomes trained in military intelligence, the gathering of information. So he gets done with all this training, then he gets orders that he is going to be deploying to Central America. Here's the problem, Roy doesn't want to deploy to Central America, Roy wants to go back to Vietnam. So Roy goes back to that very same office that he worked in for a little while he was training before he became a Green Beret, and wouldn't you know it, somehow or another his orders got changed and he was sent to Vietnam instead.
It's me.
But Roy wasn't just going to be going to Vietnam, he was going to be going to other countries neighboring Vietnam, like Cambodia. Roy was part of MAC v SOG. Okay, real quick, for those that don't know, MAC v SOG at this point in time is America's premier top secret special forces group, okay? They take all the best guys from all the other special forces, the Army Rangers, the Marine Raiders, the Green Berets, the Navy SEALs. They take their best guys and they put them in this unit together as like America's special forces dream team. Basically,
All
they're
right.
the ones doing all the stuff that America's not doing. you know? This group is so
The
secretive that
famous
nobody
air
even
quotes.
knew that these guys existed until like 30 years after Vietnam. Okay, SOG, everybody thinks it stands for Special Operations Group. That's not what it stands for. It stands for Studies and Observations Group. And they did that on purpose because they wanted it to sound like some nerd shit. That way, if a politician or a high-ranking officer that wasn't supposed to be in the know read that on a document, they weren't going to ask any questions. During Vietnam,
Checks
these
out.
guys had a 150-to-1 kill-death ratio. For every MACV SOG member that went down, 150 enemies went down first. And they do all kinds of different crazy stuff during Vietnam, but when Roy gets linked up with them, they're working in Cambodia. Okay, real brief, oversimplified version of what's going on here. You have the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, and they are trying to supply the Viet Cong, the guerrilla fighters in South Vietnam, with a bunch of supplies. Now, they have two options. They can
Let's take a little bit of a look at this map here. Step on monsoons. Filtration routes. Alright.
punch through the front line, fight through all the American defenses to deliver these supplies. Doesn't sound like a very good time. Or they could cheat. They could just cut right over into Laos and then travel through this neutral territory with no resistance, and then travel into Cambodia, more neutral territory with no resistance, penetrate way past all the American front lines, deep into South Vietnam, and then cut back in and drop off all the supplies. Okay, and to be fair, that's a brilliant plan, because there's not a whole lot America can do to stop it, right? Because the only thing America really can do is to send their troops into Cambodia and Laos, and that's not going to be a very popular idea, considering that most of America's mad that they're in Vietnam in the first place. They're definitely not going to support invading 2 more countries. So if America wants to stop this, the only thing they can do is to send their own guys into this neutral territory where they're not supposed to be, to cut off this supply line. And then, even if they do run into each other in this neutral territory, it just turns into the Spider-Man meme, right? Hey, you're not supposed to be here. No, you're not supposed to be here. And then everybody's just as guilty of breaking the same rules. It's a really good plan on their part. Okay, but here's the problem with this whole thing. America cares a lot more about not getting caught in these neutral territories than the North Vietnamese do. Because of this, the Americans are only sending in very, very small groups of men, like 12 guys or less, whereas the North Vietnamese are sending in entire companies. They're sending in hundreds of guys. So this makes it impossible for the Americans to directly confront the North Vietnamese. So rather than confronting them, they start stalking them. They start tracking them down and following them, writing down what their most commonly used paths are, what they're dropping off, where they're dropping it off. They try to memorize all their different routes. They try to figure out anything and everything they can about their operations inside of Laos and Cambodia. So that goes on for a while, and then somebody gets the bright idea of like, hey, we know where all the enemy's ammunition is. What if we just snuck in a bunch of defective ammunition that blew up when they tried to fire it, and then it would not only A, take care of some of the enemy troops that got messed up from, you know, a howitzer round blowing up, or ammunition blowing up, or defective ammo, and they go and try to get into a firefight, then the Americans are guaranteed to win. There's that aspect, but then there's also the psychological aspect of the enemy isn't going to trust their own supply line anymore. So then that goes on for a little while, and then eventually the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong figure out that the Americans are doing this, so they start sending out their best guys, their equivalent of MACV-SOG, and they send them out into these neutral territories to
It's
try
gonna
to
go
hunt
well.
and kill the American MACV-SOG operators. Because of that, the MACV-SOG casualty rate goes up, and at one point it was actually reported as being a 100% casualty rate. If you were in MACV-SOG during this era, there was a 100% likelihood that you were going to get injured or killed in the line of duty. A Purple Heart to these guys was just a rite of passage. So MACV-SOG starts taking more casualties, they realize they're being hunted, then they start doing countermeasures to prevent from being caught. They're having helicopters go in and pretend to drop off a bunch of operators when they're actually not doing it, basically spamming them. That way when they actually do go behind the line, the enemy's not going to know whether that was a fake drop-off or a real drop-off. So that's what's happening. There's like this shadow war going on in the neutral territories of Cambodia and Laos, and this is what's happening when Roy shows up. So 2 weeks into being there, Roy goes out on a mission, and one of the guys that he's with ends up getting shot up, and they have to get this guy medevaced, but they're still being attacked, so they can't go out in the open so a helicopter can land. So the helicopter has to drop what's called a Maguire rig. It's basically just a rope that these guys are going to hook onto, and they're going to pull them straight up out of the canopy of the jungle and fly off with them dangling underneath the helicopter like some badass Pinocchio. Now, usually when you do this, like you can see in this picture, you're stacked on top of one another on the same nylon rope. But for some reason on this day, they dropped 2 nylon ropes. Roy hooked the other guy that's injured up to one, and he hooked himself up to the other. And Roy probably didn't even realize that there was 2 ropes. He just saw a bunch of nylon rope everywhere. He hooked both of them up, and they were going to take off. So they get pulled up out of the canopy. They take off headed towards camp, but because they're each on a different rope, the ropes end up getting crossed, and the
Oh.
nylon ropes start rubbing together. And when nylon rubs up against nylon,
Ooh.
it melts because it's plastic. So these ropes are going to end up snapping, and Roy and his buddy are both going to fall to their death unless they can land and get this figured out, and they can't land because they're still being shot at. Now, luckily for Roy and the other guy, the belly man in that helicopter was another one of Roy's friends, a sergeant by the name of Leroy Wright, and he noticed what was going on, and he ties himself off to a third rope and lowers himself out of the helicopter in between the other two nylon ropes, allowing his body weight to untangle the ropes as he lowered himself down, saving all three of them.
Not to a gunfight.
2 days after that, Roy wakes up in his cot, time to go get breakfast. He heads off towards the chow hall. He's making his way there, and everything just starts scrambling. There's radio transmissions coming in saying it's a Daniel Boone tactical emergency. Daniel Boone is the name of the operation in Cambodia. You're not supposed to be saying that over the radio, period, which means that shit has really hit the fan somewhere. Everybody around him starts scrambling. Helicopters start going out, and helicopters start coming back in, all shot up with injured men on them. And Roy goes up to one of these helicopters trying to figure out what's going on. And the door gunner in this helicopter falls out, and it's a 19-year-old kid that Roy remembered they just celebrated his birthday like a week ago. And this kid falls into Roy's arms and dies on the spot.
Oh.
Roy asks the rest of the helicopter crew what's going on, what's happening, and they tell him that there's a team out there that's getting overrun by hundreds of NVA. So Roy continues to ask him, what team? Who's out there? Did you pick them up? Are they here now? What's going on? And they go, no, we couldn't get close enough to pick these guys up. They were so overrun, and we were taking too much fire from the helicopters. We don't know who it was, but it was the big black dude that saved you the other day. And Roy immediately knows they're talking about Leroy, and his entire team is still out there. So Roy asks them, are you going back out there? And they said, yeah, we're going to go back out there, but we're not going to be able to land. The only thing we're going to be able to do is drop ammunition out of the helicopter above them so they have ammunition to keep fighting. And to Roy Benavidez, it sounds an awful lot like somebody needs help. And with that, he runs over, grabs his medical bag, jumps in the helicopter, and they take off. A couple minutes into the flight there, Roy realizes that in his hurry to run and grab his aid bag so that he could help, he made a mistake. A really, really big mistake.
What'd he do?
He forgot his gun.
God damn it!
He is now in a helicopter flying into combat with
Not
no
the
gun,
gun.
no food, no water, no grenades. He literally has an 8-inch recon knife and his aid bag, and that is it. Despite that, Roy is still determined to help these guys. So they get there, they drop the ammunition out of the side of the helicopter on top of these guys, and then they fly off. And Roy says, get me as close as you can and land this helicopter so I can jump out. And they get him like 150 yards away from where this team is injured and pinned down. And Roy jumps out of the helicopter and starts running towards them. He makes it 10 steps, gets shot, drops him. He got shot in the leg. He tells himself that he tripped and landed on a thorn bush, and he's not actually shot, but he knows he's shot. He keeps running towards him, and he makes it another 50 yards, and he gets shot again. This time, it's a glancing blow to his helmet. He doesn't know that yet. Maybe he got shot in the head. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was shrapnel. He has no idea. He'll figure it out later if he makes it. So he just keeps running to the team, and he finally ends up making it to him. So he makes it to where the team is pinned down. They're all spread out, way too far out. They're not in a defensive position. They're running out of ammunition. Every single person there is shot, blown up. Everybody is in horrible shape. So Roy gets to work. He picks up an AK-47 off a dead NVA soldier as he runs to each individual team member, giving them morphine, whatever medical aid he can, and then dragging them over to this anthill, this big pile of dirt, to get them in this defensive position where they're actually semi-close together and they can start fighting back. Roy ends up making it to the guy with the radio, and he's like, this is Tango Mike, I've still got men on the ground. I need to get these guys medevaced. I have green smoke grenades. I'll pop them so you know where we're at. While the helicopters are on their way, Roy keeps going and getting more guys and dragging them back to the anthill, giving himself and everybody else morphine. The helicopters finally show up while door gunners lay down suppressed fire, and he starts loading up the guys at the anthill into the helicopter, but he still has more men out towards the bush line that he hasn't been able to make it to yet. So he gets all the guys on the helicopter, and then he tells the door gunner, hey, we still have men over there. Cover me. And Roy takes off running next to the helicopter as the helicopter is gliding next to him, and him and the door gunner are returning fire into the wood line, trying to make it to the other men. So Roy and the helicopter make it to the last guy that Roy knows of, and it's not Leroy. So he asks this guy, where's Leroy at? And that guy points him towards the wood line and says he got hit back there, and he's got a bunch of confidential, classified information on him. So Roy decides that he's going to go get it. He takes off running towards where this guy pointed him out in the wood line, but the helicopter can't follow because it can't get that close to the trees. So the helicopter door gunner continues to lay suppressing fire while Roy runs into the tree line and finds Leroy's body. He gets all the classified intel off Leroy's body, and then he begins dragging Leroy's corpse towards the helicopter because he at least wants to bring his friend's body home. and then he gets shot in the back. As we all know, it's always darkest right before the dawn, but as we also all know, sometimes it's darkest right before it gets even fucking darker. After being shot, Roy turns around, realizing he's not going to be able to bring his friend's body back with him, and starts running towards the helicopter. And then he sees the helicopter pilot get shot through the window as the helicopter spins out of control and crashes. Roy makes it to the crash site, and everybody there that survived is pretty much ready to call it a day. They've accepted the fact that they're about to die, and Roy hasn't. He starts dragging everybody, getting them away from the burning helicopter and getting them into another defensive position so that they can fight back. He's going and getting AK-47s off of dead NVA soldiers, getting these guys guns. He has guys that can't even see. They're missing eyes, and he's just telling them, shoot that way. Under Roy's leadership, they start fighting back, and Roy starts calling in airstrikes, F-111s, F-4 Phantoms, gunships, anything and everything they have, and they just start bombing this tree line with all they've got, and they do it over and over, but the enemy soldiers just keep coming and coming. There's literally hundreds of them, and this goes on for hours. It's too hot for them to get a helicopter in there to load people up, and every time they bomb the tree line, more enemy soldiers run out of it towards Roy and his crew. And it gets to the point that they're literally using the dead bodies of soldiers as sandbags to stop bullets. Roy and the men on the ground don't realize it at this point in time, but the crews up in the gunships that are mowing down the forest that the enemies are coming from are starting to mow down so much vegetation that they're starting to see straight lines, which don't occur naturally in nature. These are bunkers with fortified machine gun positions. The MACV SOG team didn't just stumble across an entire battalion of men. They walked right into an entire NVA base inside of Cambodia. Eventually, the air crews come to the realization that with this base there's got to be at least 1,000 men, an entire battalion there, and there's a road where they can bus in even more men for reinforcements. They're not going to be able to keep this up and get Roy and everybody else to be alive and handle
Yeah, I
this
kind of
the right
figured
way.
they
So
were
the only
both
thing that they
not
can
sure
do
how
is
close.
to have a carpet bomb of that forest, and at the exact same moment that those bombs start dropping, they're going to send in the helicopters to try to pick up Roy and everybody else. So a group of A-37 Super Tweets bomb the tree line as a Huey comes down, and Roy starts helping to load these men into the helicopter. Some of them have lost so much blood they can't even pick themselves up. And while this is happening, the North Vietnamese soldiers rush them. They're coming straight towards the helicopter. They're firing. Roy's trying to load the men on while firing back. The door gunner's returning fire, and one of them ends up making it to Roy, and for some reason, whether he was out of ammo or whether he was trying to take an American alive, he hits Roy in the back of the head with the buttstock of his rifle. Roy falls down, and then he swings it again at Roy's face, dislocating his jaw. Roy, somehow still conscious, gets up, starts trying to wrestle this guy to the ground. He lost his gun. All he has is his recon knife, and this guy's got his rifle with a bayonet on it. And the enemy soldier goes to lunge at Roy with the bayonet, ends up cutting Roy's arm, and then Roy lunges at him, misses. The enemy soldier lunges back. He ends up stabbing Roy in the stomach with the bayonet, and Roy ends up getting to him with the recon knife, stabbing him in the chest and killing him. Roy pulls out the bayonet, can't get his recon knife out of this guy's chest, and he's now holding his intestines in his stomach with one hand. At this point, Roy's right next to the helicopter, and he's looking right at it. He should get in the helicopter, but he turns around away from the helicopter, and there's 2 Americans still out there returning fire that are able to fight. They're just not able to walk, and Roy runs towards them. Roy gets there, picks up the one that can't walk entirely, and starts helping to drag him towards the helicopter, and the other guy can't crawl, but he can't walk, so he literally starts walking on his knees using an AK-47 like it's a crutch. They get to the helicopter. Roy helps load them in the helicopter, grabs the AK-47 that the guy was using as a crutch, turns around again and starts shooting at NVA soldiers that are charging towards the helicopter as the injured men behind him literally grab Roy and drag him into the helicopter as they take off. As it becomes clear to absolutely everyone that Roy Benavidez did not just bring a knife to a gunfight, the communists brought an army to a Roy Benavidez fight and still couldn't win. After saving all the surviving members of the original MACV SOG team and the first helicopter crew, through 6 hours of combat, Roy has sustained over 37 different life-threatening injuries, multiple gunshot wounds, over 20 shrapnel wounds. He has been bayoneted and he has been clubbed, and after being dragged into the helicopter, he finally loses consciousness.
Just a flesh wound.
Ain't dead yet.
His next memory is being literally waist deep inside of a body bag as an American medic is zipping it up, His eyes are caked with blood and he can't open them. He can't talk to the medic because his jaw is dislocated and he's lost so much blood that he can't move. And from the medic's perspective, he doesn't even realize that Roy's an American because he's Hispanic, he's got the same skin tone as a North Vietnamese, and Roy's body is literally laying on top of 3 dead NVA soldiers that in Roy's fog of morphine and adrenaline, he loaded into the helicopter because he didn't want to leave anybody behind. Roy can literally feel the teeth on the zipper closing as it gets closer and closer to his head, and once the zipper reaches his neck, somebody stops the medic and says, "Hold on, that's Benavidez," and he instructs the medic to double check and make sure that Roy is actually dead. And the medic argues with him, and Roy's buddy says, "I don't care, double check." And the medic zips down the body bag a little bit and puts his hand on Roy's chest and leans forward to listen and see if he can hear breathing. And at this moment, Roy takes what he describes as the best shot he's ever made in his entire life. He spits directly in that medic's face. And with that, they get Roy out of the body bag, they get him in the aid station, and they start trying to do everything.
I feel terrible for laughing at that. I think he deserved it.
After his chain of command figured out everything that had happened and that Roy was pretty much the only reason that the 8 other men that survived made it out of there alive, immediately got him signed up to receive the Distinguished Service Cross. The only reason they didn't try to get him the Medal of Honor on the spot was because they didn't think Roy was going to survive, and they wanted to get him an award that they could give him in the field so that he could receive it before he passed away. But Roy Benavidez had other plans. He doesn't pass away. Instead, he recovers. And not only does he recover, he yet again refuses to get med boarded out of the Army into a medical retirement and continues to serve an additional 10 years in the United States Army. And during that time, they try to get him awarded the Medal of Honor because if anybody deserves it, it's this guy, right? But for some reason or another, it always ends up getting rejected, and it gets rejected again and again and over and over. They just keep rejecting his Medal of Honor. But there's nothing that Roy or anybody else could do. For some reason or another, the committee in charge of awarding the Medal of Honor simply did not want to give Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez the award that he had earned. So he did the only thing he could do. He just kept on keeping on. So he went on, served throughout the military until 1976 before finally retiring as Master Sergeant Benavidez, the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. As Roy retires, there was another press push about how incredible he was, wondering why he didn't earn the Medal of Honor, and this ends up connecting him with one of the men that he had saved that Roy actually thought had died. And this man gets a hold of Roy almost 12 years after the fact, and he tells Roy that he's going to write up everything that he witnessed and send it into this committee again. And yet again, even despite all this new information, the committee in charge of awarding the Medal of Honor rejected it again. And then they realized what they were doing wrong. They were telling the whole truth. They were saying that Roy hopped in a helicopter, flew into Cambodia, and helped save a bunch of MACV SOG members. And as far as the US government's concerned at this point in time, up until like the mid-80s, MACV SOG, A, doesn't exist, and B, if it did, it definitely would not be operating in a neutral territory like Laos or Cambodia because that was against the rules.
Oh my lord.
I can neither confirm nor deny details of any operation without the Secretary's approval.
You're being too honest.
So the politicians and the bureaucrats in charge realize that if they give Roy the Medal of Honor for saving MACV SOG members in Cambodia, which wasn't supposed to be happening, there could be political backlash, and they're not going to metaphorically stick their necks on the line just to give Roy what he deserves, despite the fact that Roy put his entire life on the line for them. So bearing this in mind, they redo all the paperwork, they jump through all the hoops to try to get Roy the Medal of Honor again, and this time, rather than saying that Roy's courageous actions occurred in Cambodia, they simply said that they happened to the west of Lock-In Airfield, which was where Roy was stationed. They just didn't bother to say how far west. And once you know it,
Checks
gets
out.
approved. Roy Benavidez receives the Medal of Honor in 1981 from President Ronald Reagan, 15 years after the fact. After getting what he had earned, he finally gets to go home with his wife and kids and enjoy his retirement for all of like a year and a half. Because on a random day in 1983, he receives a letter in the mail from the US government informing him that he would not continue to receive his veterans disability benefits from his injuries that he sustained during the war. And Roy's not having it. He goes straight to the media, starts putting out press releases and giving interviews talking about how ridiculous this is and putting political pressure right back on the politicians. And wouldn't you know it, a couple weeks later, the US government comes out with a statement of like, oh hey, we're sorry that we're doing this. We haven't been handling it appropriately, we're going to continue to do it, but we're going to do it in a more humane way for everybody involved. And while I can't prove this, I'm willing to guarantee that Roy Benavidez got the notification of like, oh, sorry you got that letter. Obviously, this doesn't apply to such a high-profile person that's got enough leverage to be a pain in our ass. Here's your benefits, but we're going to go ahead and fuck everybody else. And Roy wasn't going to allow it. He came out and said that if they can try to do this to him, he can't imagine what they're going to try to do to everybody else. So he keeps fighting for not only himself, but for the other 350,000 veterans that were getting their benefits cut. Right?
Sometimes
Because
I
they
hate
need
our
help
government.
too. And Roy's gonna help him. So he keeps pushing and putting more pressure on the US government. Basically just comes out and says, hey, the same Ronald Reagan administration that gave me my Medal of Honor is now telling me and a bunch of other veterans that we're not good enough for the benefits that we earned. And with that, he finally gets to testify in front of the House Senate committee in charge of this entire operation, and they end up shutting the entire thing down, preserving the benefits for 350,000 veterans. And with that, Roy Benavidez could finally go home, enjoy his retirement, and live happily ever after. So, in conclusion, when somebody needs help, you help them. And for the love of God, the fact that somebody renamed Fort Bragg Fort Liberty and not Fort Benavidez instead is borderline criminal. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang out. Oh, hey, real quick. If you guys wanted more, there's a book called Legend by Eric Blim, all about Roy Benavidez. The author spent like 3.5 years researching for it, and he actually helped me make this video. So if you guys wanted to check it out, it's over on Amazon, and I'm sure it's on his website if you wanted to Google it too. I'll have it all linked down below. Thanks for watching.
After that PlayStation comment, I'm taking these back.
Come on. That's not funny. I want those.
No.
They locked me in my staging area and started unloading, started identifying the bodies. They found out I loaded 3 dead enemy soldiers in that helicopter. I didn't want to leave anybody behind. My mission was to recover the classified material, so if anybody had it, he was on the helicopter. They left the 3 enemy soldiers on the side, and because I sort of look Oriental, they thought I was one of them, so they let me lay right next to them. And they were putting us in body bags. And I remember that my feet being lifted, and I was inserted into the body bag, and I could hear that zipper coming up, and I thought, oh my God, no, no. And I couldn't talk because my jaws were locked, and I could hear that zipper coming up, and one of my buddies was doing the Mexican head dance, and he was yelling at the doctor, that's Roy Benavidez. The doctor said, sorry, there's nothing I can do for him. I'll find out later. Jerry Cottenham made that doctor at least to feel my heartbeat. When I felt that hand on my chest, I made the luckiest shot I ever made in my life. I spit in the doctor's face. You know, there's a saying among us veterans, for those that had fought for it, life has a special flavor. The protected will never know. You have never lived till you almost died. And it is us veterans that pray for peace, most of all, especially the wounded, because we have to suffer the wounds of war. I'm asked hundreds of times, would you do it over again? In my 25 years in the military, I feel like I've been overpaid for the service to my country. There'll never be enough paper to print the money, nor enough gold in Fort Knox for me to have to keep from doing what I did. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm even prouder that I've earned the privilege to wear the Green Beret. I live by the motto of duty, honor, country. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
That was something. That was a lot. Very, very informing. Bit educational. My brain's still having a little bit of an overload right now, because that was a lot. Yeah. Electrician. Love his work. Love his editor. Funny enough, it was just a one sm I started down the fat electrician rabbit hole videos with I believe it was about the Iran's boat or oil rigs us blowing stuff up because they blew us up. Blew the boats up, something like that. I'd have to look back to see exactly where the rabbit hole started, but and every time I always learn a little bit more about how crazy some of the military is. The Savior of the Pacific. I don't think I've seen that one. I know I've generally I've put off doing some of the longer ones because they take a while to get through. And I try to space out everything so it's not gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna watch a whole bunch of these ones and then I'm gonna watch a. Even though like he's given me permission to do the reacts and everything, I still like. I still don't like doing a bunch of them back to back to back because it just puts a bad taste in my mouth. So I try to like have variety of them, different flavors.